Hello, everyone. I'm Elaine Cercado, an executive coach, consultant, trainer, facilitator, and director of POWERinU Philippines. And I welcome you to the complimentary webinar, Figuring Out Strategy, a Game Plan for Life. Without further ado, let me introduce our speaker for tonight. Our speaker tonight is Robert Chris Asprer, Bobby as we call him. Bobby is an organization transformation and building practitioner and a commercial strategy and marketing practitioner. He is recently retired, like only a few days ago, from his role as a China self-care transition leader in Johnson & Johnson. So he is embarking on his new adventure and next adventure. In his previous role, he was accountable for driving the next stages of organizational setup for the standalone organization. This includes co-leading development of its strategic and operation plan and driving key strategic partnerships with China's top health tech companies. Bobby has served in the China Johnson & Johnson organization since 2013 in various commercial roles. Prior to this role, he was head of commercial strategy and innovation in Johnson & Johnson for both the Johnson pharmaceutical business as well as the J&J consumer pharmaceutical self-care business. Since joining the China organization, he has collaborated with the R&D, regulatory, medical affairs, government affairs, supply chain, commercial teams, and external partners in creating commercial value as well as introducing new assets and life cycle indications to patients. Prior to moving to China, Bobby had broad experience in global and regional marketing, covering multiple categories in J&J. He was also part of a small team that established the AP, I believe that's Asia Pacific, Johnson & Johnson OTC and consumer healthcare franchise. His initial role in J&J was as a commercial lead for the OTC and oral care business in the Philippines. Before joining Johnson & Johnson, Bobby worked in various positions in sales, marketing, and training in Pfizer and Wyeth. His experience covers prescription products, medical device, OTC, and FMCG products. He has won accolades within the companies he has worked with, as well as external industry bodies and government organizations, with the work he and his team have produced. Numerous James Burke Awards in J&J, as well as China Outstanding Marketing Award by the Economic Observer are a few examples. As a people leader, he has mentored and promoted a number of talents in the industry and advocated diversity in the organization. Everyone, let us welcome our speaker for tonight, Bobby Asprer.
Thank you, Elaine. Thank you, Elaine. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, everyone. I'm honored for this invitation to give a talk on figuring out strategy. Okay. We all have intense and busy lives, and even if we have intense and busy lives, we usually have breaks. I call them breathing moments. That's usually the time wherein we actually find ourselves recharging and recovering. Now, in these moments, these are important times wherein we try to reflect on what is happening in our lives. In my case, at my current age, these breaks in the moments could either be coffee breaks when I'm waiting for an airplane to come, or in traveling in one city to another city via train. Those moments, I tend to reflect on things other than business. I tend to reflect on career, on life, on my faith, the bigger pictures or the questions of why Those moments are actually reflective moments for you to think about the bigger picture. And I find this very useful. One key item that I do realize from all of this reflection is that the things that actually drive us in business, the discipline, the structured approach, the principles and the frameworks are actually also echoing in terms of how I manage the other aspects of my lives. In fact, I do realize that the things that I've learned also in the other aspects of my life as a father, as a son, even in my sports and hobby, they tend to shape how I lead, and they also tend to shape how I do business. Now, I put forward this proposition. It's basically like osmosis. I believe that if we are supposed to thrive in our lives, we need to tap all of our rich experience in different aspects of our lives. So I always wonder how come people tend to compartmentalize things, compartmentalize career and compartmentalize being a father, being a mother, being a daughter, and sports and hobbies. Technically, those rich experience feed on each other. And because of those experiences and learnings, you actually learn more. I put forward this one proposition. If strategy is so important in business, then strategy should also be important in life. And that's the best thing I think that we could learn from, is that our experiences in our careers and our professional life can be also leveraged in terms of how we approach things in a broader context. Now, in the next couple of minutes, let me share my learnings as a student. I hold no pretense. That's why I'm saying that I'm going to share this as a student. I'm no expert. I don't know everything, right? The older I grow, the more I learn, the more I experience. It's actually the reverse. I know little, and that actually drives me to discover more things. Let me share with you one of the poems that one of the deans in the medical institution of the Philippines shared with me when I was starting my career. This is a poem that continues to be relevant today, for me at least. A specific verse in the poem shows there's always one hill higher with a better view, something wanting to be learned that I never knew. That verse resonates quite well, especially for a learner's mindset. The dean that gave me this poem, even in her current position and stance, has always followed the mantra of a learner's mindset. And that's basically the approach that I'm taking. We're going to dive into certain learnings that I've discovered over time, things that you think are useful, please steal, leverage, reflect on. Things that you think that doesn't fit, please discard. That's part of being a student, right? You need to be conscious about what to take in. Now, let's move forward with one example of a business principle that tends to apply in life. For those who are in business, people would be familiar with life cycle management. Life cycle management usually has two axes. It's the gains that you have as well as a period of time. And in life cycle management, basically they're saying that the principle is that eventually your growth or the company's growth or a brand's growth actually plateaus. And what a good leader needs to do is actually trigger the next arc. So if you don't trigger it, it's basically external factors that's going to trigger the trajectory, whether it goes up or it goes down. So the best leaders actually try to influence it and trigger the arc much earlier on. So let me take this as an example and apply it to my life. I've been working in China for quite some time, and the challenges I have and the roles I get are quite robust. However, during the past couple of years, I did recognize to a certain degree a certain level of law of diminishing returns. The increments of learning that I gained were not really that big, and to a certain degree, I felt it's more lopsided. Now, don't get me wrong, I was busy. It was a challenging job. Every day I'm doing things that actually add value, but the increments of growth in terms of new experiences and learning was not really as big as when I started in 2013. And that's why I was thinking about triggering another arc. Now, if you're being strategic, the way I'm trying to think about it, I also factor in certain things that are interlinked and interdependent. Basically, my wife's plan, my son's plan. And it was a perfect time because from all of those pros and cons analysis about my wife's plan and my son's plan, we eventually triggered the change. So I triggered the retirement move, and I found a place wherein I could provide the best healthcare for my family, as well as set up my son for college life. So that's life cycle management. So I tend to think about it. How often do you guys actually think about your strategy in life? Note, I did mention life, not career. You shouldn't be looking at it in isolation because it's intertwined. A good strategy is always think about interdependent factors. And that's why it's also crucial that when you're thinking about your career, you should be always looking at the left, at the right, and trying to understand the impact to other members in your family. Now, as we move forward on life cycle management, in the next couple of minutes, I'll be talking about frameworks and principles. I wouldn't be using use cases or specific examples in your textbooks. I always believe that the best way to learn is actually to live an experience or to hear it directly from those that actually live that experience. This specific quote coming from President Theodore Roosevelt actually captures that essence. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena. And that's an important message. It's because in the fog of business, in the fog of life, nobody has complete data. If you're a strategist, you would know this. And because of this, the best way for you to try to understand things is to come up with an objective truth and try to learn the realities that surround the situation. More importantly, it's important for us to truly understand the burden of the person that's making that choice. Because the person that's making that choice usually makes that choice in certain contexts. We are just human, and those contexts actually influence our decision. Now, a famous author says that these are usually driven by 3 C's, and I'll probably add a 4th C. We're usually influenced by the contract, a clock, a crucible, and a conscience. So the contract is usually an agreement to deliver on an objective or a goal or an aspiration or a vision. That's your contract. But you need to deliver it at a certain time. That's your clock. However, you only have limited resources, or you also have competition and other factors to incorporate. That's your crucible. And the last important part is the red lines, our values, right? Our values and our morals. It actually defines what you're willing to do. Those 4 C's define the decisions made by leaders every day. Those 4 C's actually drive your decisions on your daily choices that you make in your life. Now, the most important aspect of your life, including business, is determined by not what you know, but largely by how you think. Right? You don't stop if you don't know. You go out, you try to find a solution, and therefore, what happens really is that you move from ignorance to understanding, to a basic understanding and an analysis of an objective truth. From there, you formulate your hypothesis and you move forward on planning. That's basically why it's important that the way you think actually drives things more than what you know. Now, my father was a dean in the Philippines for 2 colleges, and he always told me that, Bobby, the best way for you to approach your audience, your team members, is always to try to drive curiosity. You don't have the best answer. There's not just one answer to one problem. There's different angles to it. And for you to leverage the wisdom and the creativity with the team, it's always important to actually end a meeting with more questions than one concrete answer. The worst is actually you think that you have the perfect answer. There's no such thing. Yeah. So the best way for you to actually drive curiosity is actually lead with questions. And from there, you actually move forward. Basically, the first step to wisdom is actually curiosity. And that's why we're going to start our journey talking about frameworks and principles. I wouldn't be giving you the magic answer to your questions in life. So let's start off with the definition of strategy. So there's a certain level of confusion right now on what strategy really is. So I did a couple of research. I went into Cambridge Dictionary. I went into Merriam-Webster. And if you check about it, usually the first bullet point talks about war, talks about winning against an adversary. Now, this one, I think, is highly likely to always happen because strategy comes from the word basically anchored on war, right? Our fascination with war or sports when talking about strategy drives up a level of competitiveness. And we always think about it in terms of winning versus an adversary. It's not necessarily the case, right? Strategy doesn't need beating up someone or winning over it. And it's quite easy to get lost in the narrative because it's easy to rally people in terms of a hero narrative, wherein that hero basically is your team. But think about it, in another company, their hero narrative is actually their own team. So strategy isn't really about just beating one. And that's why I think it's important to look at different analogies for strategy. I tend to look at farming or cultivating as one way of looking at strategy. Words like nurturing, cultivating, growing, those are also words that are analogous to doing and developing strategy. And from there, you trigger a different way of thinking. Now, let's distill the word of strategy further, just to further simplify it. Okay, this in essence is my learning. If I distill what strategy is, there is a current situation, point A, and what you see yourself going to in the future, which is point B. In between point A and point B, you basically have an insight to bridge those gaps. And when you start thinking about how to bridge those gaps, you start thinking about capability and actions and making choice. So basically strategy again is about coming from point A, you're moving to point B. And note in this definition, I haven't talked about any specific adversary. We only started talking about an objective or a vision or a goal. Now, let me try to be more eloquent. Strategy is, in my definition, our ability to project ourselves in the future and to think and act on ways to focus our energies and resources to shape that future where we consciously create value. That's my attempt on explaining what strategy is. If senior leaders were here, senior leaders are going to say, further simplify this one, Bobby. And if I further simplify it, then I'll probably go into this data equation. It's basically a choice made, a choice enacted, and a goal achieved. Now, by this sheer definition, it actually precludes that everybody is a strategist. All of us need to make choices in life. All of us need to enact those choices, and all of us have a goal or vision in life. Therefore, it is better to be strategic in the things we do versus just leaving things to random faith. Now, strategy is not just a Word document or a PowerPoint. The reality is, and the hard truth, is that strategy is really what is finally executed. True strategy is formed in the everyday decisions and choices leaders and employees make on where they focus their attention and resources. This is critical because this informs what really is reality. Now, people tend to say, okay, we're going to drive brand differentiation by advertising these attributes. And then you look at it and look at their commercials and say, are they really highlighting those attributes? Another true strategy probably would say, I want to be healthy and I want to lose weight. The question is, are you really moving forward with your agenda by driving a healthier lifestyle. Now, again, what you put on your PowerPoint, what you put on your Post-it notes on the refrigerator as your vision doesn't necessarily mean it's a strategy. It only becomes a strategy when you execute it. So therefore, form everyday decisions and choices that are made by people actually is the strategy. Okay, now that we have a common understanding on strategy, let's move forward to my thinking on 3 tips in developing and implementing your strategy. Now, I've tried to consolidate all my learnings in the past to these 3 items: defining and deconstructing the goal, prioritizing ruthlessly, and customizing. Let's start with the first tip, defining and deconstructing the problem. What usually happens is that you are thrown a question by either your boss, your senior leader, or by your wife or by your son as an aspiration or a goal. The best way to actually look at it is always frame it into a propelling question because it pushes you to action. And then from that propelling question, you further interrogate that question. What's the definition of success? How does success look like? By interrogating that goal and that propelling question, you start defining the parameters of where you need to operate and where you need to look into. One more item that needs to happen after is that you need to analyze whether that question is actually embedded with several questions or different angles. So a perfect example would be a boss coming in and saying, I want to grow. Now, a strategist would further look into it and decompose that question and probably say, growth can be actually driven by price, increasing value, moving into new segments, or tapping into new adjacencies for source of growth. It's important for you to start breaking those questions into pieces because you're able to understand which levers are you going to look into later on. Right? Another example is, I want to also be an innovative company, but I need to grow. Those are actually 2 items, innovative company and growth. That doesn't necessarily mean that it shares the same thing. So you need to start breaking it down because those are basically 2 objectives that you want to achieve. Now, this kind of questioning is very critical because it's going to determine the trajectory of your activity. I'll give an example, right? A personal example. So my son comes to me and say, hey, Dad, I want to go to college. What course should I take? Now, the question is actually, what course should I take in college? But when you start interrogating the question and start decoupling those questions, you actually end up with different angles to the question. It's easy for us to think about, oh, I need to suggest something that is important so that my son can actually have a better job when he graduates. But that's not the question. The essence of going to college is preparing them for life. So we started flipping the question. And when you start flipping the question isn't really the course. The question is more like what inspires you, what craft and discipline do you want to learn, and how do you think you're going to grow into passionately growing your skill set in this discipline and in this craft. Then that becomes a different take on things. My son, eventually, we landed into identifying him as a storyteller. So that's not a course. But then when you start walking it backwards and moving it forward, you also try to understand later on that the perfect course was English literature and creative writing. So my son in August is going to the UK to actually study creative writing and English literature. Now, the end goal is not the course. The end goal is preparing him for the craft and discipline, and that he learns through those experiences and moves forward. Now, one more item after you deconstruct the question is you go back and reflect on, is this question really resonating with the true values of the company? Is this question and goal basically driving the agenda of the company? And then from a personality perspective, from a personal perspective, you tend to ask the question, Does this question or the hypothesis you have actually resonates with the true essence of the person you're trying to help? Now, this is important for most of those in corporate lives. By actually confronting this question, what happens is that you surface three potential items. First one is that you're able to identify what's most important to the company. Second, you're putting a mirror in front of the company, whether their vision and mission actually is true and authentic, connected to the questions that they're asking. Let's circle back on innovation and sales. So a company that wants to drive innovation and sales, and the vision is actually to be the best innovative company in the world. Now, then the question would be, what's that right mix so that you continue to drive R&D resources so that innovation continues to happen? If you look at the company's portfolio and you say how much is R&D investment going on compared to sales investment, then you'll have that level of assessment whether the company is being true to their vision and mission. So that's why it's critical to always look back. Are the questions that your boss or the questions you're asking yourself resonates with who you are as a person, or is it also resonating with what the company is saying their vision and mission should be? Once you have this, now you further deconstruct to the elements of the question. So we talked about breaking growth into price and volume. By doing so, you're able now to look at leverage points and start looking at hypotheses and then start prioritizing them. Now, after doing this, there's two more tips connected to deconstructing the problem that's critical. The first one is this would be very relevant to healthcare professionals. People tend to forget and ask the question, what is the root cause of the problem? Or what is your basic stumbling block from achieving that specific goal? Healthcare professionals think about the root cause, not just the symptom. Strategies should be thinking the same way, right? You need to start thinking upstream, right? What is causing this question? What's driving this question? The second tip is actually to look at it downstream. So you now have a hypothesis, you now have a strategy. The question is, have you thought it through? How is it going to be executed? So if you start doing upstream and downstream thinking, that basically helps you frame where to go through when you're developing a strategy and eventually executing it. Let's now move to the second tip. The second tip is ruthless prioritization. Creatives in advertising would understand single-mindedness. That's the thing that I learned working with creative agencies. They say always embrace the or and avoid the and. This is critical for strategies and leaders because there's no such thing as multitasking. And the most important part is to try to drive binary choices. Now, I think healthcare professionals are experts in this. Their level of thinking is triage. When a patient comes in, they're automatically focused on what's the important thing to actually address the biggest problem a patient comes in. So binary thinking, single-mindedness, triage thinking, those help you prioritize where to focus. Now, some people say, Bobby, it's not really black and white at times. So in corporate life, it's always complex, right? In personal life, it's also complex. So on those moments that there's not really a clear binary choice, it's usually a balance. The right balance may be achieved if you identify the threshold of quality of resources that you will get from those two competing factors or goals. A perfect example would be running and singing. You can run and sing at a certain pace, right? But when you start focusing on running faster, eventually your quality of singing gets affected. And that's where mix comes into play. It's the same thing with marketing activities, sales activities. It's usually not binary. Then it's more like, is it 70-30? Is it 60-40? And your debate is the threshold of those two competing factors. Now, this is critical because sometimes when it's not about binary choices, you need to confront the leader about the right mix. Now, I like this example because if you take binary and triage thinking and apply it to personal life, I think things are clearer if you know what truly matters. Binary choices makes you mindful on things. Now, most of you are high-performing persons, and probably in one instance or experience in life, you would probably have experienced the thing that I've also experienced, wherein you're torn to focus on the moment, focus on your family, but at the same time, you're dabbling on your iPhone or your emails. Binary choosing actually forces you to be mindful about things, about what's more important in life. And that's why this is also critical, especially when it comes to managing your personal aspect on things. Now, the third tip is customizing. Now, customizing is important and critical, and this is, I think, one of the pitfalls that leaders usually have. You usually have strategies of other companies or other persons, and what you're asking to do, what you're really after is to develop your own strategy. It starts usually with what drives you, what makes you authentic. And then from there, you start creating strategies. Now, the watch out is that there is a difference in terms of level of awareness and uniqueness that you need to be constantly looking at. If you're an organization or a company, if you're competing versus a number one player, if you have a certain generic strategy, that strategy is actually associated with the leader in your category. Now, what you need to do is actually be true to yourself or be true to the organization and try to customize it. You need to either be differentiated or distinct. Now, the question is, how do you become differentiated or how do you become distinct? To be differentiated and distinct is always to look back internally, go back to the heart and essence of your company and the essence of you as a person or the essence of your family unit. And that's where you say, oh, my skill set, my values actually offer a different thing or makes me distinct when I start executing. Now, I'll give you a perfect example from a corporate perspective. People tend to look at PowerPoint slides and say, I'm going to do digital, I'm going to do omni-channel, I'm going to focus my resources in the highest profitable customers. Actually, you cut and paste those bullet points and apply it to another company, it resonates. So what you have is actually a generic strategy. It's not ownable. People will see through it as generic. People will wonder, what does that really mean? Now, how do you ground it to more details that you could own? It's circling back again to your values, your strengths, your weaknesses as a company, and your values would also determine what are the red lines that you're not supposed to cross. By doing so, when you articulate your strategy, you're going to be able to differentiate and become more distinct. If you do this, it becomes easier to rally everybody. You become authentic and you move forward. When you're authentic, you actually drive advocacy. And this is critical. So what you say and what you do need to sync up. And that's why it's important that you need to customize your strategy to the realities of what the organization is, or who you are as a person, or who you are as a family unit. Now I'm moving forward to the next couple of slides, and this topic now will focus on tips to be strategic. The first one would be curiosity and a desire to act. I think it's always important for you to nurture that level of curiosity and desire to act. Now, I think people are experts in being critical on things. Words are important. So the first thing that usually happens in a major strategic meeting is, what's the problem to solve? Words matter. And the word problem tends to allude to negative things. I tend to try to look at it in a different angle. And we start talking about puzzles and mystery boxes. So when you go into meetings, the best thing to start a meeting is say, what puzzle are we trying to solve today? Or what mystery are we trying to solve? It opens up a different mindset. For you to do this, you need to have these two items, right? The best leaders usually have these two items, critical thinking and exploratory thinking. Critical thinking to a certain degree is mastered by most of the corporate folks. Critical thinking is you suspend belief. You tend to say, I challenge that thinking. That's critical thinking. My experience is that leaders who also know exploratory thinking actually allows more interaction, more collaborative discussions, and creative angles to a solution. Exploratory thinking is focusing on how can I make this true? And then by exploring that question, you further identify whether that's a dead end or actually something that you could work towards to. So leaders that actually have critical thinking and exploratory thinking is able to drive and foster curiosity. Now, the other tip is to use strange leap of points. You're going to hit a wall sometime. If you hit a wall, that's when you apply your creativity. You look at analogs. So if you're a doctor or you're an administrator, you tend to probably want to ask the question, how would an advertising agency answer this question? If you're in marketing, you could probably ask the question, how would an HR personnel answer this question? The other piece is also mix and match. Mix and matching different ideas from different people, and you might come up with a new solution set. And then the other one in terms of creativity, which I like to ask regularly with my teammates is, how might this person solve this problem? Because it pushes you out of your box and you start thinking about different angles. Now, another strange leap of point, I think, which is most important, especially for the young generation to learn quite quickly, is that you need to embrace failures and constraints. It's not a negative. Those two items are your secret sauce of achievement. Use it as something that can propel you forward. So embracing failures and constraints, you should be actually saying, yes, I failed because now I know that I need to refine or find a different way to solve my problem. So embracing failures and constraints is actually a leap off point for new ideas and new strategies. Now, I wanted to share one item that a mentor of me shared in one of the exercises. If you do this, you could have a pen and paper and try to log in your personal and family high points and low points, and then also have your work high points and low points. And then what you do is you put a line in terms of time period. And my mentor was actually asking a whole team to actually track their high points on personal family and work family. So you have this line. The more the people start drawing this line in terms of high points and low points, they started to discover to a certain degree that these lines actually start to show an opposite dichotomy. This tends to happen if you're siloed. If you don't think about the big picture, your decisions in your career actually also affects your family's life, right? And your personal health and your personal life. And this is why it's critical not to decompartmentalize things, but try to look at interdependencies. Now, one item that I was telling my mentor, actually that line, if you're able to be strategic, it should be progressive. So things are moving upwards rather than a flat line. If you're doing so, each items actually move you up to a better person. Each item actually moves your family to progress to your direction or your agenda. And in the context of life, then those swings aren't really as big, right? Because we tend to live longer lives right now. And if you look at the scope of things, if you're planning your life together with your family, technically career and personal life should be intertwined. And if you're consciously planning it, you're moving your needle or you're moving your agenda to a higher and better position and situation in life. Always trust on your ability to learn and your ability to have agency. But it starts with making those choices and analyzing things and understanding that you shouldn't be compartmentalizing things. So that's basically my short narrative or short sharing on the things I've learned over my past years in career as well as in a personal life. And I'm open right now to questions. Thank you for your time and your patience and for listening.
Thank you, Bobby. Wow, that was so packed. So it's so rich and packed. And I've been taking notes as well and learning a lot in the process. As we wait for those who have questions to type in the chat box their questions. We encourage you, by the way, to send your questions through chat or click your icons, the raise your hand icon, so that you can be called and unmuted. We'll try to ask as many questions as we can, as long as the time permits. While waiting for those, let me just check the chat box. Okay, so while waiting for those, Bobby, we do have pre-sent questions. When the audience registers, they do send questions. And let me read off some of them. Okay, so how can a leader focus on developing strategies if daily work requires firefighting and tactical actions?
Okay, that's a good question. And I'll apply the framework, right? So deconstruct the problem or the question that was asked. So if I look at it, there's probably 3 angles to that question. I'll start first with developing strategy. If you go back to my premise on what strategy is, development is only one stage of a strategy. For you to actually have a full strategy, it needs to be implemented every day. Right? It's not just after your presentation, it gets implemented. Now, if that's the premise, then technically you should be thinking, is your firefighting more about your execution? Then you shouldn't be feeling guilty. You're actually doing your job, right? So developing strategy doesn't stop, right? You need to actually implement and then refine and tweak it. And you can only refine and tweak it if you put it to the fire. So that's why I like firefighting. The question right now is going back to the second point, which is ruthless prioritization. So ruthless prioritization, you would then start asking yourself, are you firefighting for the right reasons? Are you putting your energy where you move the needle, right? So healthcare professionals, I use that as an example, triage. They automatically think, is this going to solve the problem of the patient quickly? And that's where I'm going to focus my energy. That's how leaders should be. Right? And I think the last reminder, and this was one of the message that my mentor mentioned to me, you need to make time. I think that's critical in life, right? So again, a personal part of it is becoming healthy. I could always say I'm too busy, but I think the most important part is that if you say you're too busy, that means it's not a priority. Make it a priority, right? Developing strategy, implementing strategy is critical. If you're firefighting because you want to implement the strategy, good on you. That's the right thing. Then you need to refine and you tweak, right? And then find those breaking moments wherein you reflect further and check whether you need to refine the strategy.
Thank you. Thank you for that. So ruthless prioritization. I like that term. Ruthless and binary thinking, as you said, embracing the or and avoiding N. I will ask one more from the pre-sent questions, and please type in your questions in the chat box. And Trina, can you just help Luke in case I miss? This one, you talked about balancing. Can you share with us your weapon to survive the game of life and balance? And the person said, without spending a lot.
I think, again, we practice the deconstruction of those questions, right? You need to start to split it into 3 items. If it's important, technically you're spending resources there, right?
Mhm.
Whether it's the limited resources, you're focusing your resources on those items. So trying to find the right balance in life, I think, is always critical. But you always start in terms of identifying that life shouldn't be compartmentalized. If things are intertwined, right? Technically, whatever decisions you make in work needs to also echo with what you think is going to affect your family lives. And that's why it's important for you to actually always weigh those choices, and then always go back. Yeah. Always, I think everybody in this call started with probably their dream to have a good family, their sons or their daughters graduating, a healthy life, a good work. Nobody goes in and say, I'm going to just focus on this part and I'm going to forget the rest. If you keep on reminding those choices, then you're making your trade-offs consciously. And then go back to that slide that I showed, right? That's that arrow wherein you actually move the arrow in terms of timing upwards. That means you're making trade-offs probably for just a day, 30 minutes, probably 40 minutes, but those are conscious choices because it moves your agenda as a person, as a family, and to a certain degree, a career part, right? But again, career, business, that's only a small part of your life.
Yeah. I like that, that graph, the last 3 or 4 slides that you showed with that graph, where both the life and the work are overlaid. It's an excellent representation of, and I believe in that personally. I guess I just saw a question, but if I can just ask this question as well, Bobby. You talked about strategy as choices made, choices enacted, goal equals goal achieved. Okay, so and not being random, but rather, be purposeful in that. Of course, we all now live in what we call a VUCA world, right? So volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. So I would just like to hear any tips from you on how will you navigate that? Because you want to be purposeful, you want to be binary in thinking, you want to choose. However, not everything will turn out according to your plan in this constantly changing world.
Right, right. I think the VUCA happens when you're not always interrogating the questions that come to you from an employee perspective. Right? You get questions left and right because your boss is also existing in the world of VUCA. I think then you need to ground yourself in terms of, is that question really connected to our vision and aspiration as a company? Then you anchor yourself. Once you anchor yourself, then it's about priorities and choices. There's a word that people always use right now because of VUCA. They said agility. People need to be agile, right? Left and right. I think if you look at it from the extreme, there's agile and not decisive. If you're clear with your strategies, your aspiration, and your vision and mission, technically you're agile in terms of how you're executing towards your vision and your goal. It's basically from a personal perspective, if you're looking at a healthy life with your wife, your son, you could probably have, react to a Sunday cone or sweets for one moment, but then you flip back later on because you're consistent with a healthy life. Then you counter it with exercise or with eating the right things. So I use that as an analog because it's quite relevant, I think, for everyone. People can react to everything left and right, but if you're clear about your priorities, you're going to make the right choice. If you're not clear with your priorities, then you need to circle back and reflect. Take a break, sit down, reflect what's more important in life, what's more important in the goal that you're trying to drive from a business perspective.
Okay. So it's a constant reflection, asking questions, and prioritization. And to your point, the anchor is very important. What really matters or what is really important is, is key to that. And I will just read. We have around 10 minutes left. Please type in your questions. There's one here that I want to read. If your role in the company is more of an influencer rather than the main decision maker, any tips on how you can influence your more senior stakeholders or main decision makers to be more strategic rather than think of quick wins?
Okay.
Very
Okay.
interesting.
That's a good question. I live that life on a regular basis. I think I flip back again to binary choice and triage thinking. Sometimes if you're an influencer and you're not a decision maker, what you need to do is you need to surface the choices the leaders need to make. Right? So you say option 1, option 2, option 3, and you say, what's your trade-off if you choose option A? What's your trade-off in terms of option B and option C? And then always work backwards in terms of, is it moving the agenda of the company? So let those options actually surface naturally, and then let that trade-off become the start of your dialogue with your boss. Your boss is going to make a decision, definitely. I remember that slide I said about man in the arena. He has those 4 C's. He's making choices based on that. Your role as an influencer is to actually surface those options, and then eventually he needs to bear the crown. He needs to make that decision. Your role is actually making sure that you're surfacing the right things.
Okay. So guide through those options or surface, as you said.
Yes.
But the boss still has to
Make
the choice, wear the crown.
That's the burden of the crown. That's the burden of the crown. The pitfall that you need to avoid as an influencer is actually just say your point of view, option A, without surfacing the other options that you were saying. Having a position or a stance is all right. That's basically what's needed, but you need to surface the other options that's on the table for the leader to actually respect you.
Okay. Thank you. A very, a lot of wisdom, Bobby. Thank you so much. Okay, so while waiting, we probably have a couple more minutes to answer your questions. There's one here that I'd like to, I'm not sure if this is at all related. I don't know if you want to answer this question, if at all, it's related. How do we manage burnout?
Burnout. Okay. I'll probably double into it to a certain degree. Again, what you learn in terms of structured approach in discipline in life, in business actually also applies in life, right? Burnout, again, deconstruct. What do you mean by burnout? Is it lack of energy, or are you just tired about all of the blah, blah, blah discussions inside the corporate room? Then probably I think what you need is a break, right? But it's always important, again, to go back to asking your question. If you're saying that you're burnout, probably ask, how do you define burnout? Is it because you're not getting something done? Or is it basically every day you feel that it's heavy to go into the office? Then you might need to ask the question, what's driving that? That's deconstruction. The other part to it is binary choice, like I mentioned. If you're not taking your breaks, and you go back and say your vision is to be healthy, then technically you're not making the right balance or mixed decisions in life.
And so that probably is the same framework or process that you will apply for this other question, which is, how do you start a business? Small, any kind of business for that matter.
But that's a good question. very, very timely also. But again, I suggest and I recommend that you guys pull back. Again, deconstruct the question. Is the question really what kind of business, or how do you put up a business? Basically, the question would be, what are you trying to answer with that question? Even before that, I probably go back and look upstream, right, and deconstruct. Probably if I were to advise somebody, I'd probably say, what things do you want to change in the world or in your situation, what keeps you passionate, and what drives you to learn. Those three items. Now, once you answer those three items, push your thinking downstream. How do you monetize if it's a business that you want? But you usually start off with those three questions versus saying, what business should I start? Right?
Can you say that again, Bobby? What change do you want to?
What change do you want to do in the world, or what change do you want to do in your situation? Second is what value can you create? And then the third one would most likely be what do you want to learn? Right?
Okay.
Yeah.
Very good questions to ask. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think this is all part of what you said about driving curiosity, leading with questions, and you know, really asking those hard questions and really reflect on them. Rather, you know, and the simple question, of course, not, well, it's not simple, but the question like how do you start a business becomes even you know, there are different angles, like what you said, right? The different perspectives that show.
You'll never go wrong with those three questions. If you're looking at a new job, you basically ask the same three questions.
The same questions. I'm sure our audience have learned a lot. Thank you so much, Bobby. That's all the time that we have. And on behalf of POWERinU team, I'd like to thank you. I'm sure the participants here and in FB have learned a lot. And so we'll just have a few more words. So thank you so much, Bobby. And we'd just like to tell you that so you don't miss out, subscribe at www.powerinU.com.ph to get updates on events, webinars, and free resources from POWERinU and its partners. Thank you for joining us in this complimentary webinar. Thank you, Bobby Asper. And we look forward to having you join us again on August 9 for our next webinar. Do I have what it takes to be an entrepreneur? Sharing by a successful tech entrepreneur. Becoming a tech entrepreneur is a big decision. You're risking everything on an idea that may or may not work out. The speaker, who is Ricky Dagelet, will be discussing the realities of being a tech entrepreneur, what it takes to succeed, and how to avoid common mistakes. He will go through his journey from corporate life to starting a successful tech company. Between building and scaling a product or service, recruiting a team, raising money, there's a lot on the line. You will hear stories of the challenges and success the speaker faced when managing a startup and how it evolved to find a niche in this highly competitive tech industry. As a participant, you can use this webinar to better understand what to expect and assess your readiness to move from corporate to suggestions and pitfalls you need to be aware of when starting your company. We'll discuss the skills and traits that are essential for success and how you can start developing them now. Everyone in this webinar will automatically get an email invite to our next webinar. And of course, do register for that. Lastly, everyone can access the recording of this webinar through POWERinU's website, Facebook page, and YouTube channel. And before we finally end, I would just like to request for 10 seconds of your time to answer this short poll so we can get your feedback. You can scan the QR code in the screen or click the link that Trina has put there on the chat box. Your responses, your feedback will definitely be appreciated as we want to further improve. And we thank you for those feedback that you will give in advance. Again, thank you for joining us and see you on August 9. Have a good night.